Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. Today is Friday, October 2nd, and we're glad to have you with us. We've got a fun show today. First up, I want to tell you about the MedHealth Mixer that is coming up Thursday, October 8th, and Stacey Frankovich is going to join us in just a minute to tell us about that. After that, our third installment of From the Frontlines with Dr. Niki Kennedy, where we talk about the felt needs of doctors and healthcare workers. It's important to stop and think, what do they actually need? Because oftentimes we want to push our ideas out there without listening. So this is a chance for us to listen. After that, we're going to talk about SaMD, that's software as a medical device, the Pre-Cert program that FDA is working on, and in general, FDA's Digital Health Innovation Action Plan. And so we'll get into that as well as Q&A from you. But as a first item, I want to bring Stacey Frankovich live to the show. Stacey runs the MedHealth program coming out of Techtown, Detroit, and if we can get her to turn herself live there. There she is.
Hello.
Welcome back to MedTech Crossroads, Stacey.
Thank you. Always happy to be here with you.
Thank you for clearing a little bit of your schedule today to be with us. I know you have other things and specifically some mentorship stuff you're doing today, so we appreciate your being here. I'm going to bring up on the screen a document that you sent me about this mixer that's coming up. But while I do that for everybody, would you take just a minute and remind us what MedHealth does, and then you can start talking about the mixer.
Sure. So MedHealth is a regional collaboration that supports both Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario. And we work through convening, connecting, and educating innovators in our network, in our community, with the goal of improving the patient experience and improving healthcare in large through innovative technologies. So that's just a brief discussion on who MedHealth is. And like I said, we primarily focus on convening and connecting and educating those innovators to the right resources at the right time. Those are kind of our sweet spots or our pillars, if you will. And we're excited to be offering this upcoming event to help facilitate some of those connections.
And this is really, I mean, in previous years, there would have been a MedHealth Summit happening, I guess about now, or was that back in July, I guess?
We would have had a summit in April.
In April, oh wow, okay, where is the year gone?
Yeah.
And this is a really cool effort to get people connected. Tell us a little bit about the format and who's attending and maybe some numbers or things like that.
Sure. So first, this will not be a replacement of the summit that we traditionally have, which is a live event held at Ford Field, and it's free each year. And we do a lot of very highly curated matchmaking between innovators and health communities, payers, providers. This year, obviously with COVID, we're going virtual. We're using a platform called Brella. And what this platform is going to allow us to do is use some intelligence in making those matches. So you'll be able to jump in and put on in a full outline of what your product is, who it serves, what type of connections you're looking to make. And Brella is actually going to help to facilitate those connections based on interests and likes and things that are the same. So this is a little new to us. And we do have some educational programming going on throughout the day. We've got some fantastic sponsors. So you tell me, Jean, where to go with all of it. I'll take your lead.
Well, so give us an idea, because I think if someone's thinking about whether to attend, it's free. That's good. We like that. That's a good starting point. This idea of making the connections. Just give me an example here. So if I'm an investor, or if I'm a service provider, or if I'm a startup, what should I expect when I come in to this? How am I going to get matched up? How do I know I'm not sort of wasting my day?
Sure. So the first thing you'll do is when you get a link, when you register with us on our website, you'll get a link into the Brella platform, which will allow you to create your profile. So this is similar to creating a profile on any social media network, really. You're able to put in your description of what your business is, your profile picture. You're able to link to your website, your LinkedIn, your email, your Twitter account, any other information that you have. And then you're going to be offered a whole section on interests. And these interests are really tailored to, the MedTech specific, but more specifically into where your product fits within the health system. So if you're an IT product or a software product that the sole purpose of your product is to help with operational issues within the health system to lower costs, you'll be able to choose that section so that the health systems that are there that day looking to interact with some of the innovators will be able to see that, okay, you have a solution that could help our operations. You have a solution that could save us money. So it's kind of broken down into who the product serves or who the end user is. So if it is an actual med device, who's going to be using it? And then you'll be able to choose based on that. So the criteria, I think there may be about 26 criteria that you can choose from. And we do ask that you try to really fine tune it to help with that very specific matchmaking. But something else to consider, Jean, is in the past when we have just matched innovators to health systems or to university programs or resource providers, this time around, you're going to be able to interact with your peers. So if you are a digital solution that perhaps works with a med device, you can maybe find somebody and interact with a peer and kind of bounce some ideas off each other. Additionally, because it's been a live event here in Detroit, it's been centered around Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario. We've done outreach now across the nation through Canada, and even we have some global partners that have been helping to spread the word. So for example, we have Children's Hospital of Los Angeles participating this year, and that would not have been a participant in a live event. So we're excited about not only getting the innovators in front of the right people, but getting all of our providers, all of our network in a position to be able to network with each other.
That's awesome. I think we just, you and Niki and I were sort of chatting beforehand about how this is one of the bright spots coming out of COVID, as we've all learned that we actually can interact quite readily, whether the person's next door or across the world, which is kind of neat. One of MedHealth's partners, Plug and Play, we just did some mentoring for them this morning, and I know they're going to be at the Mixer, and they've really noticed that as well, that they can link people all over the world, which is really cool.
Right, and the same with investors. So not only do we just have Michigan investors, we have investors coming from all areas as well. So these investors who maybe wouldn't normally see what we have to offer here in the great state of Michigan get to see what we have to offer now. So that's exciting too.
Well, we're really excited that you're doing this. Anything else we should know about the Mixer? We just posted the link in the chat where they can register. I know Niki said she was going to try to get out to ArborHive with the registration information as well. What else should we know about it?
Well, I just can't stress enough, this is a free event. We have some great speakers. I'll be doing a panel with U.S. House member Brenda Lawrence and one of our really successful innovators, Lisa McLaughlin. And I cannot pass by the opportunity to say that Jean will be there doing a live version of your webinar, right, that we're doing today, right? Are you going to do a live one?
We're going to do a special edition of MedTech Crossroads on the 8th during the webinar. It's not under the normal heading, so you got to register for the webinar if you want to get to that one. Next Fridays we'll be here at the same time, same channel, but we're excited to have a couple of interviewees lined up. We're going to do 2 15-minute interviews as a part of the Mixer. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
We're excited to have you come on board. We've got Henry Ford Health System coming on board to do some, do a little educating. And, aside from networking, we're going to try to have some fun and have some interesting conversations. So join us, please, network, have some fun, be a part of it. And I'm always available for questions as well, and reach out if you have any.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out. And I know you had to move some things around to be with us today live, Stacey. So thank you for doing that. And we're looking forward to seeing you on Thursday, the 8th.
Yes, and thank you, Jean, for hosting us. Always happy to move things around and be a part of this. So thank you for hosting.
So much fun. Talk soon. Thanks for being here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And if you're live with us today, the link to that was posted in the chat, and you can get to that within the chat. Next up, I want to welcome back our friend Dr. Niki Kennedy, who is a surgeon. She's got so many degrees under her belt. I think I asked her once, "Hey, Nikki, are you going to add lawyer to that?" And she said, "No, I've got other people to do that." But I want to welcome Niki Kennedy back for what is now our third installment of what we call From the Frontlines. Niki, are you there?
Hey, Gene, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we've had some fun in previous sessions, about once a month here, thinking together about what the doctors are actually feeling. And you get around a lot. You're running ArborHive. Your whole goal here has been to bring doctors and practitioners together, to band them together, which is awesome because oftentimes investors will band together, service providers will band together, academic institutions will share best practices about tech transfer. And ArborHive is all about, hey, doctors, let's have that chat. No, we're not an island unto ourselves, but we can get together and we can talk about stuff and we can share best practices from the inventor perspective, which I think is just amazing. And you and I have been talking about different elements that you in your travels have found that practitioners care about, their felt needs. And we've talked about other items in previous shows, communication and other things like that. Today, we come to compliance. And I remember when we were prepping for this, the first thing that went through my head is, oh yeah, I forgot to take that thing that I was supposed to take, or oh yeah, I forgot to go to the gym and I just didn't feel like it. And what was fascinating about the conversation that we have had before and that we're going to sort of go over today, that's maybe not the primary compliance problem. And so many of us are so used to, I have all these resources. If we're having this discussion and we're part of the medtech community, there's a decent chance that we have access to decent health care. There's a decent chance that we, if it's not happening, it's probably because we're not keeping up our end of the bargain. But I think it came as a little bit of a shock to me when you said, hey, Gene, that's not necessarily what I'm seeing as a practitioner. Tell us a little bit more about compliance.
So the usual disclaimer, I don't speak on behalf of any one health system. I think over the course of my over 20 years now in this, I've probably rotated at most of the big hospital systems in the metro area, and I have colleagues and friends from all over. We all agree that we are humbled about how many great opportunities we have in our lives when we see some of the problems our patients face. Absolutely. And it's funny because I was a little surprised that you were so surprised when we were prepping for this call, because I think we as physicians take it for granted. So it was actually very refreshing from my end to hear, I don't want to say your innocence on it, but for lack of a better word.
Yeah, fair enough.
I wasn't quite sure how well this conversation would go, but I think you've proven to me that there certainly is a need to have this conversation, because it's not something that I think everyone normally thinks about. And as you said, we've talked about communication issues, we've talked about different things, but communication and compliance are a little bit different. Communication is sometimes how we talk to patients. Are things compliant with all of the privacy and security factors that we have? Are we getting correct information out to in a timely fashion to patients? But compliance is a whole other beast unto itself. Like you said, most of us, myself included, are guilty of saying, I don't really feel like going to the gym today, or I took most of the pills from that antibiotic course. I'm going to skip the last couple. And we don't really think much of it. Unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of our patients. Sometimes our patients can't afford things. And I think we've all seen those commercials on TV for the cell phone apps that help you find the best prices on prescription drugs. GoodRx is one of them. I see that one all the time, when I'm watching the news or over dinner. And I think that brings up a great point. Cost matters. Not everyone has insurance. Not everyone has great insurance. So these sorts of things do count. And sometimes what we find also is the insurance copay can be more than if somebody paid cash for it, if they thought to ask. And that's not something myself as a college educated person really realized until I saw this happening. Somebody who maybe it doesn't ask those questions would be very, very vulnerable to spending a lot of money that they don't have. But it doesn't just stop there. Prescription drugs are a great, easy, low-hanging fruit target, but there are a lot of other things that patients need that are difficult for them to find in terms of how much it's going to cost them. Durable medical goods such as dressings, bandages, things that they need in their house, railings, crutches, walkers, those sorts of things. All of those things cost money. And it's not my patient wouldn't use the walker, but if my patient can't afford a walker, or maybe the walker they have is falling apart, or it's too hard for them to maneuver, they need something else, and they feel that it's outside of their price range, we don't have a good way to help them find better access to those sorts of resources. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I get to play the naive foil today because a lot of what you have told me here actually comes as a bit of a surprise, and of course, and we don't want to go into the political side of things at all. That's not our goal here. But when we think about healthcare in the U.S., so just sort of being factual about it, I think there is a push to see more coverage, and there have been government things done for that. And again, not to go on the political side of it, but this seems to be an issue that you're seeing on the ground of I can't get basic things covered. Now, to me, I would naively think a wheelchair, if you prescribe it, somehow it's gonna happen. But you're telling me no, not necessarily. Can you break that down just even anecdotally in terms of percentages, in terms of folks you're seeing who either have coverage or don't have coverage, or in theory they have coverage, but the coverage isn't good enough to cover even something as basic as a wheelchair?
I think wheelchairs probably are covered, but I'm gonna throw another example out for you that I think is absolutely crucial, and I see it literally every week.
Wow.
Home care.
Okay.
Try to find somebody that you can hire or have your insurance pay for to come in and help you change that dressing. Bringing you your supplies, being able to get the supplies that you need. It's very challenging. Again, part of my job is running a wound care clinic. So every week I have patients who are not healing, at least healing very slowly and having a lot of setbacks because they can't find anyone to come in and help them change their dressing frequently enough. Even if they could, sometimes insurance won't pay for their dressings. And some of these dressings are very specialized and expensive. A lot of these people don't have a lot of free cash running around. I have patients where if they drive occasionally, they are expected to drive all the time. So they would be expected to drive every day for a dressing change to our clinic in that case. We don't do that, of course, we try to limit it, but we still have some patients who come 3 times a week across town so we can change their dressing because we can't send a home care nurse out there and it's too expensive for them to try to pay for it out of pocket. So
wow. And so
it's
you end up with a situation where you're having to bring them back into the healthcare system, which is probably not the most cost-efficient thing to do necessarily.
Some of them, again, we can't get a home care nurse through their insurance because they might be on a Medicaid style program or something else along those lines, and they just don't have those resources for them. So instead, they have to have a driver, bring them out so that we can do it at our clinic. And it's challenging. You want to be as efficient and as powerful as you can when you're trying to take care of a patient in terms of making an impact and fixing that disease. And running into obstacles like that can be frustrating, both for provider and for the patient. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. I think you're opening our eyes to some of these things in terms of getting access to these items. You had said folks won't buy it because it's not covered. Their insurance might not pay for it. They can't pay for it out of pocket. You're saying that things like home care, in fact, what else are we going to do? We're going to bring them in at a high cost back into the hospital system because somehow that is covered, but we can't just get someone basically to go and plop a new dressing on. From an innovation standpoint, this is kind of interesting from an innovation standpoint because what I'm hearing is there might actually be healthcare items that are outside of what a person has covered, but are more necessary than we realize, which if there were lower cost alternatives out there would be an actual direct bottom line help to the patient. Am I thinking too far there, or is that a reality?
You are thinking right on the track there, Gene. We actually have a lot of patients. Again, I use wound care as a good example just because there are so many fabulous problems with it, where we have an item that's not covered by insurance. Many dressings, bandages, those sorts of things just aren't. So we'll tell patients, you can buy these over the counter, and a lot of them will actually go on Amazon. So now you're getting many of your healthcare items on Amazon. And I think the gears in your head are probably turning because you've seen all of the problems we've had with unvetted suppliers along the way with your FDA journey. Yeah, we don't have a way to vet anything on Amazon, and nobody's come up with Amazon Medical yet. So we don't know exactly what our patients are getting. Now, granted, most of the time they do get what they need, but I've heard of some price gouging issues that they've encountered along the way, availability, they've ordered it before, now they can't find it. It's very challenging for some of them. And that supply chain is not something that outside of an insurance portal is watched as closely from my experience. So if you had a way to help patients understand what they need, what an equivalent would be, make sure that it's coming from a reputable supplier who meets FDA standards, and tell them exactly how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take for them to get there, now you're talking. And I haven't seen that yet. If it's out there, I'd love for somebody to let me know, because I've got a whole clinic full of patients who would love that. So.
Somebody who's doing that vetting outside of that, and of course that's a problem we've highlighted many times on MedTech Crossroads, which is you often will have things coming in through Amazon or whatever else, and Amazon doesn't necessarily get held responsible, but those items are coming in from companies that can just disappear in the blink of an eye and off they go.
Yeah,
What do you do? What's that?
I'm sorry, just you have no idea where those supplies have been or where they're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's an interesting problem for our creatives to think about. Those who are on the call, and maybe those of you who are on the call have some interesting ideas or thoughts or questions about this or experiences that you can share as we get towards the end of our discussion in a bit. But what do you do as a physician, Niki, when you're faced with this vetting problem? Do you hear this a lot of I can't get it through my insurance, I'm going to go out and do this? Do you ever help or try to help with that vetting process, or is that just so outside of what you can really do functionally?
It gets their limitations. We can tell patients what they need, and frequently patients will have some insurance coverage, but there are some less critical items where it may not be, or it's just one of those things where they'll cover the prescription cream, but they won't cover the dressing you have to put over the prescription cream. So we'll oftentimes give patients the packaging and say, go online, go to your local pharmacy, ask around. I happen to be at Henry Ford West Bloomfield, not a plug, but just happens to be where I'm at. But I will say that our pharmacy has been very good in that we worked with our durable medical equipment people, and they actually stock some of these items through our pharmacy, which is usually pretty low cost if you go to a hospital pharmacy. And our patients are oftentimes referred there, one, because it's on site near the clinic, so we know that they can get it before they leave. Two, because if there's a stocking problem, we know who to ask. There are limits as to what we can do in terms of, we have no control over the retail side of it, but they have been helpful in working with us. So again, from a supply chain side, I think that if more pharmacy and DME suppliers were involved with this and were able to give patients reasonable access, that would be another great solution.
Yeah, it seems like a huge thing. This is maybe going a little bit too philosophical, but I often think that people tended to be more generalists back in the day, and everyone would have a little bit more knowledge about a lot of things, but maybe not as deep. And we've so specialized and we've so optimized supply chains and things like that, that the minute something sort of snaps and breaks down, and obviously things like COVID only make this worse, now you've got these things out there, but no relation between them, and it's tying those relationships back in that makes such a huge difference.
Patients,
to be able to know, is this good?
Yeah, patients, including myself, have become so dependent on what insurance covers and what doesn't cover that it affects our choices. A less severe example is I do a lot of varicose vein work, so I'm a vascular surgeon. Most insurance companies won't allow us to do any kind of varicose vein surgery on patients unless they've failed medical therapy, which means you got to try the compression stockings first. Most insurance companies say 3 months. And then if it doesn't work, then you'd be eligible for us to go through an intervention pathway. So they want you to wear stockings. Insurance companies won't pay for stockings. So I have patients coming to me all the time saying, Doc, you say I have to wear these stockings. They're expensive. I can't afford them and my insurance won't pay for them. And I say, but the insurance won't pay for your surgery if you don't wear them. And they say, but Doc,
Oh
the
my
insurance
goodness.
won't pay for the stockings. So it's always fun having that conversation, especially in like a really hot summer month when nobody wants to wear stockings anyways. But it is really kind of a circle and not a very logical one, unfortunately.
Wow. Wow. Little loose ends that get lost in the process because it's not engineered all the way there. That's fascinating. I've got a dear friend who has to get places for dialysis, doesn't have a vehicle, and you had listed transportation as one of the
Huge problem.
non-compliance things, and I've seen that in a friend's life. Um, is there anything more we can say about transportation? Is that a pretty typical scenario? Things like dialysis or doctor's appointments, checkups, not being able to get there.
Very challenging. I think groups like Uber and Lyft were starting to dabble in some of this, but I think with COVID, a lot of things have been derailed, which is unfortunate. Here in the Metro Hudson, Detroit area, our public transportation system is not as mature as it would be in other big cities. So patients can't hop on a subway or train and make their way over to the medical center. Patients are reliant on other people driving them. There are services that will do that. But again, it's something that usually has to be covered by an insurance payer. I have one patient who has to take the bus to see me. So he comes at 7 in the morning because that's the time the bus comes. And waiting for me when I show up there on a Monday morning because he just has no other way of getting there. And it's okay. I've had colleagues who worked with other surgical fields like transplant and such, and they've actually driven their patients home or given their patients cab money so that they could get back home, because having a really critical appointment, for instance, if you have a transplant kidney, you can't miss your appointments. You can't miss your medications. You have to have the access. That's one of the requirements of having a big medical procedure like that. So if you can't come in and be seen, then that's a problem. It kind of gets into a little bit, we were talking about the telemedicine side before too, I think on a previous episode. Do you really have to have that patient come in? Can you find other ways to get the information you need? And some of it is physical exam. So I think if we had some advances from that side, transportation might be not as much of an issue. I think that telemedicine works great for counseling, behavioral health. Absolutely, it's going to be amazing if we can work that out. But physical examination is still a challenge.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I think it's important for people to think about, though, not every medical innovation is necessarily a medical device. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the distinctions on the software side, where some things are devices and some things aren't, but they can all help in this general concept of healthcare. And something like transportation, like mobility, as our friends in the transportation industry like to refer to it as, that can be a critical part of the delivery of healthcare, and we don't often think about it that way, which I think is just, it's really neat to bring out.
Yeah, a lot of room, a lot of white space. We have not solved the problems, that is for sure.
I remember when people would talk about like the development of the Metro Detroit area, there seemed to be a very big expansion where a lot of things got put, but not all sort of city center. There would be these outskirts, and I don't know what the historians would say as to whether it expanded too quickly and didn't develop from the inside out as slowly as it should have, or what. But I know it's something we wrestle with in Michigan, is the distances between places and covering those. Well, let's go back to a topic that we did touch on last week, but that is that of communication and its role in non-compliance. Because like we started out, oftentimes it's me just not feeling like I want to be compliant and, raise my hand and admit that I'm a bad patient in that way. Niki raised her hand too. But there are some ways that miscommunication really does play in. What are some ways that miscommunication creates non-compliance?
It's multiple points for potential failure on that one. Sometimes that when you're talking to a patient, they are a little distracted and they are not listening. And that's okay. I'm completely guilty of that. Somebody will tell me something and an hour later I will have to call them up or text them and say, what did you say again? Because my brain is someplace else. And especially in a medical setting where lots of times people are nervous. It's not a comfortable setting for 99% of people out there. So if you don't have somebody with you who's pretty savvy and can listen or take notes or help remind you, when you get home, you may not remember exactly what your doctor told you or what those instructions were. We try to write everything down, but sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes people don't read carefully. Sometimes they don't read in the language that I'm speaking or writing in, or what their information is printed in. And those kinds of things can get us into trouble. We don't necessarily want to limit medical care, but trying to get a translator in or trying to get somebody in to answer telephone calls, answer these questions in an appropriate manner, it's not always a time efficient thing. So we continue to struggle with ways to communicate with our patients when they're not in the office. Most major health systems have access to some kind of translation service. I know we've got a telephone service that works really, really well. If I'm doing a procedure on somebody, I'll usually bring an in-person interpreter in. It just seems more appropriate than having a person on the table with a phone up in their ear. And these are fine, but as soon as that patient leaves my office or my procedure room, if they have questions, it can be problematic trying to get answers to those questions. Or frequently, patients will hear one thing. It's not really what I had said. There are actually more issues nowadays where patients have a little too much communication in some people's opinion. There are a lot of transparency acts that have been passed here in the United States that give patients free access to their entire medical record, which is fine. I have nothing against that, but that includes all of their tests and doctor's notes and things that maybe have language in or verbiage that aren't quite clear and could cause a lot of anxiety. I've had personal experiences that have been challenging with those sorts of instances. I even had a colleague say that a patient called her up and said, you have to change this. You have to change the note you wrote on me because your note says I have cancer. So she looked back through the note. It said in the past medical history that was automatically brought in by the electronic medical record that she had no personal history of cancer, but the patient didn't read it correctly.
Oh my.
And this person was really upset that she had cancer, so much so that she actually called their doctor and insisted that she go back and retroactively rewrite her note to fix that.
But it was a misinterpretation of the documentation.
Yes, so having too much communication can be a little bit of a challenge, but I think probably the bigger issue is having communication that isn't explained well. I think patients need better education or better access to resources, and Google MD is not the best place to get your degree.
How many times have you had to argue against Google MD, right?
So many patients say, but doc, I read this study on the internet. We all just sit there and say, but we went to medical school and passed all those board exams because it took longer than the 2 seconds took you to Google it. But if it's on the internet, it must be true. So having some good educational platforms for patients, I think, is another huge SaaS-based or tie into what you're doing later, opportunity for innovation. How can we educate our patients in a high quality, controlled fashion so that we know exactly where their resources are coming from, who's writing those things, and make it so that patients believe it. Again, lots of times patients will read something and then they'll see an ad or a sale on something that sounds similar, so they think it's okay. And different creams, people say, honey is supposed to be good for cleaning wounds. They've been using it for thousands of years, so I'm going to get this honey from this website. You have no idea what's in it, if it's been processed appropriately. But there are medical grade honey-based dressings that we do advocate for. So helping our patients to realize that there's a difference and helping them get access to that and answer the questions that they're using it appropriately. So again, compliance ends up being a much more complicated issue. Communication plays a big role in that, as you said. And we certainly could use some good innovative ideas to try to tackle some of these problems, because this is where I think a lot of our patients don't perform as well. You can set up a great plan, But if they aren't following that plan for whatever reason, they're going to keep coming back.
Yeah, that's great. What do you have to contribute to this conversation? I'd love for our audience to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Maybe this is something you've experienced firsthand. Maybe it's something that you've got a question about. I'm going to invite our friend Frank Urban, who was just recently on the show with us. He had an anecdote for us, and if I can find Frank's button there to bring him on to chat. Frank, I'm gonna hit send on the link to all panelists and all attendees that you just shared with us in the chat. But I think it's interesting, and I'd love for you to just tell us what you have seen in Ann Arbor.
So basically, just coming from my background, I was also an EMT and firefighter. And Ann Arbor had a unique way of dealing with some of these issues where they had what they called community paramedics, which were just single paramedic units. They had a fully stocked SUV, and they would go around and manage patients. So they would help them get their medicines. They would drive them to appointments. If they needed something, they would try and fulfill that from the local hospital systems. And it was something of a community service to try and lower patient healthcare costs in general. So it really added a solution that patients could really utilize. And I think they helped a lot of people. And the goal of the program was to just lower health costs in general by getting people, simple items or vetted items like you were mentioning on the show. So that's something that happened in our home community that not a lot of people knew about, but I think it was really impactful for patients just to be able to get their medications, take their medications, get to their appointments. And I think that Huron Valley Ambulance is still doing that to this day. So it was a really interesting pilot program.
That's fascinating. Do you happen to know how that was paid for?
No, I do not.
That'd be an interesting thing to look into. I've never heard of that, but it's a neat option to get that intermediate layer right there. Niki, have you ever heard of anything like that?
There are different communities that offer senior transportation services, Meals on Wheels, home care sorts of options, but it seems to be, and Frank, I'd love to hear your experience with the rest of it. I find that it's very community dependent. It's harder to find in some of your bigger urban centers. What I've seen though, that usually is a local community driven, like the city will pay for it as part of like one of their senior funding initiatives. I think my local community has something similar to that. They offer, rides to doctor's appointments, things like that for a nominal fee for our senior citizens. Not accessible to all citizens. Usually you have to qualify for it though.
Got to be in a risk group or a high age bracket.
Yeah. And with COVID, I'm not sure how well those programs are going to do just because of safety and all of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a big thing right now that we're seeing. It's great for all of us who want to talk across the world on Zoom to other people and make connections. But if you're actually living in your house and you're bound there, we've got to do some thinking as to getting out there and taking care of you. Our friend Ken Spencer, question or comment?
Maybe both. So Dr. Kennedy, on your initial example of compliance issues with dressings and wounds and things, or procedures and stuff out there, I'm at MCERC at the University of Michigan there, and we have done a lot of work with the military, and in particular, a company called ADS, Alpha Delta Sierra Incorporated, and they're a $3 billion company, and they primarily supply all the DoD stuff, in particular combat medics and things from special forces. And all of their stuff, I can tell you, because it's hard to get in there. So it's all FDA approved, it's all vetted, there's all supply chain stuff. And individuals can't go there. But I'm just wondering if there's a way that the Michigan hospital systems could get together and purchase things through them at some kind of volume rate or something like that. But they're really wonderful group of people to work with. I don't know if you've ever heard of them or looked at them.
I haven't, yeah. No, I mean, that's great. I mean, I think part of the problem we have right now is that we have multiple health systems here within the state that collaborate for patient care, but they are individual groups that are out there to advance their business. And they don't always collaborate on those sorts of things. I mean, I think in terms of public health, they do. But in terms of individual supply chains, at least from what I've seen with the COVID crisis when it first hit, there was a little bit of every man for himself. And there were a lot of people out there who had access to different supplies, but each hospital system, from my conversations with people in all of them around the metro area, seemed to have their own supply chains that they secured usually as soon as they could. And after that, they stuck with those supply chains and didn't collaborate quite as much between. I'm sure if there was great need, they would. But I think you have a great suggestion about having a central agency that has these sorts of supply chains. If they could do the volume, that would be, I'd love to see our hospital systems get together and have that kind of discussion. There's a group called the Michigan Hospital and Health Association that does have its regular chain of command. I'd be interested to see if they've already looked into something like this, or if that's a little beyond from a budget standpoint what they've been able to accomplish.
Well, the other option too is that ADS might be quite interested in contacting all the different people and see if they want to get together and do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, they're a really good outfit.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of would be if you know the people at ADS, just ask them if they reached out to like the Michigan State Medical Society and have that conversation. They're a pretty active bunch. A lot of the physicians I've worked with have been pretty involved with them. That's our local state physician society. So,
And give me that name again.
Michigan State Medical Society.
Okay. So I know those folks, so I'll take that as an action item to reach out to them.
Yeah, if they haven't made that connection, I think that would be a great place to start.
Okay, good. And
Love it.
an anecdote on, issues with, going round and round in circles on stuff. So I had a granddaughter who, had developed severe aplastic anemia out of the blue, when she was 1.5 years old. And it took forever to go through these tests before that she was allowed to have the bone marrow transplant. And we literally almost lost her because it was so low, her counts were so low that they had to do skin graft tests. Nothing came back on the blood. And they kept having to go through these tests to do Fanconi and rule out all these other things out there, Fanconi and stuff. And I mean, it was nip and tuck, there for a while. And from an engineering standpoint, it's like, when you're 99.9% sure that there's no Fanconi, there's no symptoms out there, and you can't go forward with it, But anyway, she made it, and then we ran into after she successfully went through the bone marrow transplant and was recovering, that the insurance said, and what was all turned out to be low was her IgG count, and they said after 6 months, no more IgG stuff, And so, luckily, my son-in-law's company stepped in and said, no, we're going to take care of it, kind of thing. But you get into these ridiculous things. I mean, it's just, when you have somebody so close to you having to go through that, it really makes an impression on why we need to fix things.
You really feel it. Well, we're thankful that your grandchild is still with us, and we thank you for your comment, Ken. Great. Well, Niki, I think this is really fun. Next time on From the Frontlines, we're going to start to talk about individual stories of doctors and things like that. But these last 3 times have been sort of an overview of some of the big issues. And I just want to note for everybody again, this isn't a startup coming and saying, hey, we need to deliver this solution, right? This is hearing from the docs and saying, what are you actually running into? And a lot of times the answers surprise us, especially as developers. And I think it's good to hear that, and it's good to listen. And we're really thankful for what you're doing with ArborHive. Take just a couple seconds here and tell us about, one more time, about ArborHive.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Gene, for just giving me the chance to chat about these sorts of problems, because very few people ask. And you and your company have been great about really digging in deeper as to why these things are problems in the first place. So thank you to Into Being and yourself. ArborHive is the innovation network that I have loosely put together as a grassroots nonprofit movement where we've got all kinds of physicians from different walks of life, from not in Michigan, but also from all around the country. And what we want to do is we want to help growing startups come up with better ways to use and develop their technology. So customer discovery is king in our books. If we can help get involved with startups that are thinking about ideas or trying to determine which way their design needs to go, and maybe offer some input as to what docs are actually looking for, or what that CRNA is actually using, or how that actually works when we plug it in the OR. We'd love to try to connect you with some people just let us know. ArborHive.com is the website. We actually have partnered with the My Pitch group, which is sort of coming from the University of Michigan Surgery Department, doing a live brainstorming session coming up on Tuesday, October 20th. If you come to our website, come to our social media channels, you'll find out all the details on that. But we're looking for people from all walks of innovation life to come on out and brainstorm a few ideas about some medical problems that we've dreamed up for you. So.
We love it. Well, thank you for being here, Niki. It's always good to see you. And in about a month's time, we'll look forward to having you back for the next installment of From the Frontlines.
Good
Thanks
times.
for being here.
Thanks again.
Next up, let's talk about software. FDA is famous for its acronyms, and SaMD is no exception. We're going to talk today about software as a medical device, the FDA's emerging Pre-Cert Program, and in general, the FDA's Digital Health Innovation Action Plan. I want to make this distinction. We can say software in a medical device, or we can say software as a medical device. And even as we say that, I hope the distinction is pretty self-evident. There are many medical devices that rely on software to run them. There are many medical devices that actually are software, and you say, hey, wait a minute, software can't be a medical device, and in fact, software can be a medical device. The term device doesn't necessarily mean that there's hardware there. So a key difference is that the device is gone, but long live the device. Software can be a medical device and frequently is. Some of the distinctions are that hardware risk mitigation is often not possible because there's no hardware. And the architecture of software often matters more than the architecture of a physical device. If I can create a physical device, as long as I can get it into a form and I know what that form is and the form is well defined and I can test it, then how I got there, it matters, but often not as much as with software. And so architecture becomes a major focus. Bottom line, how you go about the development of software and how you go about the development of traditional medical devices can be very different. FDA has recognized this, and in 2017, the agency came up with their Digital Health Innovation Action Plan. And I want to touch on this with you for just a little bit as to what they were planning in 2017, what has transpired since. Then we're going to dive for just a few minutes into the FDA's Pre-Cert program that they're developing. The program's not done yet. They're in pilots, but there is some new information as of this last month of September 2020. In the Digital Health Innovation Action Plan from 2017, FDA says that they recognize that an efficient, risk-based approach to regulating digital health technology will foster the innovation of digital health products. They also recognize that their traditional approach to moderate and higher risk hardware-based products, it's not well suited for software. How you develop software tends to be very different than how you develop hardware. And they even recognize that the traditional implementation of the pre-market requirements, what you have to do for clearance, isn't always appropriate, and it may impede or delay patient access to these technologies. So our hat goes off to the agency for recognizing that the traditional means for regulating and clearing devices are not always appropriate to software. And in their 2017 plan, FDA started to lay out how they wanted to take discretionary oversight with a high focus on high-risk applications. And of course, if you've been listening to MedTech Crossroads, you know that benefit risk is a huge part of how the agency approaches things. And to put a low focus on low-risk apps or devices that just relay information or devices that are just for general wellness. And some of you are familiar that wellness devices, even though they could be considered medical devices, the agency has often said, we're just going to kind of not enforce that right now. It's not to say that they couldn't still be defined that way, but they're trying to use their discretionary enforcement to say, we're going to let you do this over here. What's really interesting is that FDA is talking about asking for statutory changes when it comes to the regulation of software, because they're starting to recognize that not everything in the statute is completely compatible. The fact that they have to I'll use this phrase a little loosely, almost turn a blind eye to certain things, means that there are legal changes that would be helpful in the regulatory framework of how we run things in this country. So some areas of work that the agency has been looking at for the last few years include implementation guidance for if you're thinking about a mobile medical application, a storage system, a data system used for transfer, storage, display, or conversion of medical device data. If it's not coming up with the data and if it's not interpreting the data, they're going to try to take a little bit of a reduced burden approach. Storage devices used to store or retrieve images electronically, that's a reduced burden area. Medical image communication devices used to transfer medical image data electronically between medical devices, again, a reduced burden area. Low-risk general wellness products, something that they've already been exercising discretionary enforcement. And laboratory workflow software, all things that they kind of want to get out of the way and let as much of this happen as possible. Clinical decision support software is no longer under FDA oversight, and that's being used to good effect by many companies. But there is this issue of multifunctionality. What if your software does some things that are still considered as a medical device, as well as some things that aren't? And the agency is working on ways to look at those separately, and that's an important aspect as well. They also cover in this aspects to when does a software change trigger the need for a new 510K? Really important question, because software can change so quickly and you say to yourself, I'm just going to add a feature. And the agency recognizes that ability, the fact that they want to enable as much as they can, but there does come a point where if it's a medical device, it's really appropriate to submit a new 510K for those changes. And so the FDA works on guidance for that as well. The International Medical Device Regulators Forum is a harmonization body, international harmonization body that the FDA is working with on the subject of SaMD, on the subject of software as a medical device. And what we're going to talk more about now is this specific topic of reimagining digital health product oversight, or the Pre-Cert program that FDA is working with IMDRF. To understand the Pre-Cert program and what they're going for, you have to understand that for any medical device, any traditional medical device, the typical process as outlined under 21 CFR 820, and this is greatly oversimplified, generally involves for a startup or a new company, first the implementation of design controls to manage the creation of a design history file. Now that design history file and those design controls go on for the life of the product, but at some point you say, we're ready to submit our 510K or we're ready to submit our de novo. And much of the material for that submission comes out of that design history file, that design process, the thinking that went into those design controls. At some point in the process, the rest of the quality management system comes into play and needs to be there before sales occur. The device master record that says what is the current generation of the device emerges at some point during that process. And eventually down the road, you're likely to get audited by FDA. It comes as a surprise to many people that your quality management system isn't audited until after you're already on the market. And this provides some benefits to the company, but it also provides a lot of unanswered questions until later in the process. That's a typical process. Here's what the pre-cert process starts to look like. The idea is that the FDA could come in, perhaps with the help of a third party, and certify the company's procedures and systems the way that they develop software. Remember that we're only talking about software here. Based on the risk level laid out by IMDRF and others, based on the risk level of the software in question and the pre-cert status of the company, FDA is proposing that certain lower risk software or certain modifications to existing software could go straight to commercial distribution. In the case of ones that actually need more review, they're hoping for a streamlined pre-market review, unlike the relatively burdensome 510K or de novo process. Then you enter commercial distribution and real-world use, and then you do post-market real-world data collection as a follow-up to make sure that the device is doing what you expect it to do, to make sure that no new risks are manifesting, to make sure that usability is there where it's supposed to be. That's the idea. This is the September update from the FDA on developing the software pre-certification program, their summary of learnings and ongoing activities. And here's a little timeline as they think about it. They saw the idea and the concept as forming back in 2017, 2018. 2019 was about starting to work with specific companies. I believe they had 9 pilot participants, have 9 pilot participants. And they're, with public input, crafting a working model, working with these companies and basically saying, okay, did this work? Is this going to work? Can we get you there through this alternate process? Often using the existing regulatory process as the baseline, but running this one in parallel and saying, okay, if we had done it this way, would it have worked? Could we have gotten there? And the goal is to get this from a pilot, which it is now. The pre-certification program is a pilot, to a full-fledged program that can be used for companies. Here's some of FDA's observations. They say that a mock excellence appraisal reliant on remote pre-work and objective evidence appears to be a viable alternative to a multi-day on-site visit. In other words, they're saying, you know how later on you would have been evaluated on quality through an audit on-site? Well, we're finding that we can actually do some appraisal of your capabilities up front. We can do it remote. That's a good thing. So that's cool. They say that additional exploration and testing is needed to inform the streamlined review. And this is a place where if you've ever experienced the FDA's review process as part of a 510K or de novo, you know that it can be very challenging to get through all the data that the agency is interested in. And so we can see why it would be a challenge to optimize this streamlined review. The agency these days has been very focused on risk. They've been very focused on usability, questions that companies often are not anticipating ahead of time. What are the impacts of usability? Have you explored the usability of the device? And it's very hard for the agency to let go of those to be post-market questions. It's usually easier for them to see those answered up ahead of time because they know they can be issues. They want to see the answers. They want to know that the device is going to be safe and that it's going to be usable. And so that is a hard thing. I think they're finding that it is hard to create that streamlined review. This collection of real-world performance data, the idea of letting some of the scrutiny go post-market. It's a beautiful thing if you can get it to happen and come to agreement with the agency, but it can be very hard to come to that agreement ahead of time because oftentimes the agency believes they have good reasons why they want to see that data pre-market. And so that's another place where the agency is trying to figure out how much from a software perspective of this data can come post-market. Those are some of the agency's observations. Their next steps for the pre-cert program are to continuously assess and evaluate the readiness of the program before progressing to the next phases of development. We alluded to the fact that they are actually considering obtaining legislative authority to fully implement it as a new pathway for software as a medical device. Right now, the agency is trying to do some great thinking and some great work, but they have to do it within the confines of the existing legislative framework. They can't change that. Only Congress can change that. And so they're actually considering asking for changes to the legislation to enable a new approach to software. So what's the bottom line? Today, unfortunately, the bottom line hasn't changed very much. The good news is that there are areas of reduced oversight, health and wellness, and decision software being some key ones. Understand whether your product is subject to FDA oversight, step number 1. If it is, you still need to implement FDA's software lifecycle guidance and design control expectations, and that's something to start earlier rather than later. And as of today, you still have to submit for the historic regulatory clearance methods until a pathway like pre-cert becomes operational. But we wanted to give you this update on the pre-cert program because we think it's really important that the FDA is thinking about this, is getting out there and getting the public's feedback on it, And we do hope in the near future that these things that are somewhat informal now, exercised through discretionary enforcement, will become methods that will lead the way for the next generation of software and, in general, medical device regulatory oversight. And hopefully these will trickle down to all the other areas where some of these innovations would be useful. So with that, that is a brief overview of software, SaMD, the Pre-Cert Program, and FDA's innovation pathway. I want to give any of our guests who have a question the opportunity to chat. Ken Spencer, you're live.
Yeah, so Gene, a couple of things. Under the slide of areas of work, I saw no mention of machine learning there, which really bothers me because that is an area that probably has the potential to have the most impact in this particular thing. And having them, I know Jean Baird has to deal with it all the time, and it is totally stretched out, you know, her timeline and costs and things out there. So that's one area of concern. And the next was, would you equate this pre-cert thing with an EUA, as an EUA kind of thing? In other words, is it somewhat equivalent where FDA would say, okay, pre-cert, you're good to go, and we'll get all the data later? I mean, is that somewhat equivalent?
It's not really equivalent to an EUA. I remember I was at a conference one time, and Jeff Shuren, who's the head of Center for Devices and Radiological Health, was talking to Tamara Jensen, who's with CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid. And of course, CMS would love nothing more than to pay for outcomes. Forget about the device, forget about the treatment. I just want to pay for outcomes. And so it's a point of working tension, friendly tension. And I remember that Dr. Shuren said, very pointedly to the whole room, he said, every device we clear to the market is an investigational device. In other words, what he was saying was, every device we clear to the market, you can never have all the data on it. You will never know everything about it. And FDA has traditionally had a tension between its reviewers who are tasked with trying to search around and find out what all the problems could be with a given device, and the overarching philosophy that they're trying to bring to bear, which is a benefit-risk philosophy. And so I think what you see with this, could we do some of this post-market, is this tension. FDA recognizes in theory a lot of scrutiny could be brought post-market. If you're doing a pre-market approval, a PMA, a lot of that happens naturally as a part of that process. It's less common the lower classes of devices you get to. But they recognize in theory that this could happen. It's often a practical matter of getting a given review team to acknowledge that this would be an appropriate use of post-market surveillance. And so that becomes the challenge. So not exactly like an EUA. And we could follow up afterwards, Ken, on the machine learning aspects. I know FDA does have task forces on machine learning. You're right, we don't see it in here. It would be interesting to dig into why.
Yep.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then also when we get to the next steps there, having been with the FDA on software, you know, guidance and things that they had, I mean, I'm sorry, but it could be years when they look at these next steps. And that isn't very helpful when we're looking at the, you know, opportunities out there, especially, I mean, I'm just right now focused in on machine learning stuff, but we see stuff coming out that could really make an impact. And it is really incredibly difficult to try and work with this.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as I do, it's important to get in there early and understand what the current burdens are, even though they're not the ones we'd like to have, to understand what they are and to adapt that development process to it. So yeah, great points, Ken. Appreciate it. Appreciate you being here. Great. Any other questions? Any other comments from our audience? We will open it up for open questions and open comments. If you or your entity is doing anything you'd like to tell us about, feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll give a few seconds if anyone wants to raise their hand on that. And if not, I want to thank you for being here on this 28th episode of MedTech Crossroads. We'll be back next week with Scott Mers from MC3 and Russ Yanka, who is a longtime quality person in our local community. Now with Zoran Technologies, we're looking forward to having them and looking forward to having you back here. Thanks again. Bye-bye.